Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Kristen Eccleston, aka the Neurodiverse Teacher. And today, my guest is Lauren McClenney-Rosenstein. Dr. Lauren has a passion for education, advocating, and bringing awareness to dyslexia at the domestic and international levels. Dr. Lauren is a certified special educator, holds a Doctor of Education in Teaching, Learning, Leadership, and Curriculum from Northeastern University, and holds a dual master's in special education and elementary education from Syracuse University and a bachelor's degree in psychology from Syracuse University. Dr. Lauren is the CEO and founder of Think Dyslexia LLC and delivers training and professional development to teachers and administrators at the district level, focusing on dyslexia awareness, dyslexia screening, and MTSS. Woo! Well, welcome to the Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast, Dr. Lauren. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kristen. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm so super impressed by you in general, everything you've accomplished, everything you've done. And the first thing I want to ask you, just kind of jumping in, is what is the why behind what you do? Meaning, what is your story? What has led you to the point where you're at right now, being that CEO and founder of Think Dyslexia?
Yeah, great question. It took me a while to figure out my why in regards to building a business from scratch, but I have to tell you, really, my why is my journey. My why is the struggles that I went through in school. And I was not, I don't want to say I was a bad student. I loved school. I actually loved the concept of, quote, playing school. I would always love to go get my new supplies. I'd love to get my new school outfits. I'd love to meet all my teachers and connect with my friends, but I was just never really good at playing that game. And I think it really, came to fruition to understand and see I just couldn't take the tests. I just couldn't study like my friends. And it was hard for me. And I think, fast forwarding to all of the things that you just listed in my credentials, I mean, really special education it felt like home for me, really connecting with kids that I could see their struggles because I had those struggles. And so knowing that students have those struggles in that traditional, way of teaching, and also knowing that parents may not know what they don't know, I saw so many different things in all of the different environments in which I'd worked in. And I'm like, I really want to just kind of cut through that red tape. I don't want to have to work around not saying this term or not telling parents they should go here because I might get in trouble by this person by saying this. And it really just kind of evolved into, I think maybe I could just have my own personal business or my own private practice to really just support families and really give them that reassurance that it's okay. We just learn differently and we can figure it out.
I love that. And one thing my listeners might not know is one of the things that we ended up wildly connecting on was the fact that we both have ADHD. And I think a lot of people don't think about that you and I both have higher education degrees. We've worked in education, but we both have ADHD. We've been impacted by that as a student. And so I wanted to touch on that a little bit too.
Yeah.
In kind of that role of when you were in the classroom, how you feel like having ADHD may have actually helped you and being a really solid teacher. And I also want to talk about it in the extent of being a business owner too, and how ADHD actually can be a really big thing for business owners. So if you wouldn't mind sharing how you felt like ADHD had a positive impact on you as a special education teacher and now as a business owner.
Yeah, first of all, I love that you framed it in the teacher sense, because I was really struggling if you were like, as a student, because I'm like, oh gosh, what are the positives of that journey? But I will say it did make me a better teacher. I think, first of all, I already had the empathy and the compassion from the get-go. I mean, I automatically could see, okay, this student is struggling because maybe there's some anxiety around the student being called on and they're not ready and prepared. Or maybe there's some self-esteem concerns around the fact that maybe they're just throwing their hand up in class and blurting out stuff and their peers are like, what is going on with this kid? And I just felt like I could really understand where those children were coming from, because that was me. once upon a time ago. And I think also I was able to bring that. I'm a very transparent person. So I love communicating with my students, with clients, with, my husband, with everybody really, to really say like, let's really talk about what's going on. I was always told I was very sensitive growing up, almost sometimes too sensitive. And I know that that is definitely an ADHD trait. And I think it's a good thing because I care deeply and I really want to make sure that I'm not hurting someone's feelings intentionally. And I want to make sure that I'm understanding their perspective. So I think in general, that made me a very empathetic, understanding, and think outside of the box kind of teacher. And I think, I was very good with co-teaching. I could bounce from this subject second period and then go here in a different subject. And the kids were like, wait, you were just in this class and now you're teaching. And I'm like, yeah, because I get bored easily and I need, to be able to have that. So I think that's one thing being a teacher, like those are my strengths. And I really, now that I'm kind of thinking through it, I kind of miss having that boom, 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 working with this student, working with this teacher, being able to kind of look at this content, being able to look at that. But in terms of being a business owner, I will say there have been a lot of pros and cons. And I think a lot of it is me really understanding the way my brain works. So I have 2 computers up all the time. So I might, I have my to-do list of things where that's been something I've had to really get super disciplined about, because I might start my day thinking I'm going to do these 5 things. And then all of a sudden I get this creative thought. And then I'm like, oh, I'm going to go do this. And then I'm like, no. It's now like I wasted 3 hours thinking of this idea. I need to get back to doing this. So it's like, I think that's kind of a con in a way where I've been all over the place, but I've been able to hone in on my creativity to say, well, I can do 3 or 4 projects at once, as long as I have my own accommodations to know, like, let me actually have my Apple Watch on and put a 1-hour timer and say like, okay, I'm just going to focus on that and get this done. And I feel like when I can do that and hyper focus, I actually get a lot accomplished when I have my systems put in place.
I love that. And I love how you said accommodations, because I think sometimes we forget, even as adults with ADHD, even if you didn't formally go through special education, because I didn't know I had ADHD officially until I was 30. So I was well past getting an IEP or anything in school, right? But we still create our own version of accommodations, almost like a forced type of thing, because you have to at least find something that works for you in your brain, right? And I, for years, kind of had this idea, kind of like what you said, where you have this creative thought and you go off. And I used to make myself feel really guilty about it, because it was like I was neglecting some of those like hard to-dos that had to be done.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, but that was where the passion, that was where the creativity was. And I would find myself, if I tried to almost not allow myself to get sucked into that, then I would just get stuck, because then I didn't want to do the things that were on my to do. My brain wouldn't stop thinking about the creative thing I wanted to do. So now I try to structure my day where it's like, okay, I'm going to allow myself to do the things that I want to do. So it's like I can get them out of the way so that I can go back to those other things. And for a long time, I really beat myself up about it. But now I try to give myself a lot more leeway and passion, because I know I'll get to the things I need to do. And I'll get to them a lot faster if I don't put myself in that paralysis of, well, I can't move because I don't want to be doing those things right now. I want to be focusing on that creative thing. It's like I had to find a little bit of structure in what my accommodation was, and also a little bit of compassion towards myself too. Because I found like there was a lot of, I was beating myself up a little bit, like, why can't you just get this done, or focus, or, stay committed to whatever this one thing is. And I'm curious, do you find yourself sometimes maybe not providing as much compassion to yourself because you feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing, or how it's supposed to look like today?
Yeah, I like 100%. And to be completely honest with you and the audience listening, it wasn't until I had to set clear 2023 goals for myself, with really more self-care with my mind, not beating myself up, because there would be times where I would write my to-do list and it would never get done because I was so derailed by another thought. And then of course I'm like, you didn't even stick to the list. Like, what's your problem? When really I got a lot of things accomplished. It just wasn't on that list. And so what I actually have found that's working for me, especially, running a business and really trying to keep myself organized, is first of all, I use my iCal on my phone. Okay. So I have my Google Calendar, my Apple Calendar. I have like to-do lists and Airtable. I have reminders on my phone, but I also have an actual like planner. Now, I know people who are listening can't see that I just put this up, but this is like my lifesaver. I literally spend a lot of time in it. It helps me look at the day, and then I just put like whatever is on my schedule that day. And it's not my to-do list of what I need to do. It's just I have a meeting or I have a podcast interview or whatever. And then I have the 3 top things that are like non-negotiable to get done. But then I also have, what do I want to get done for the week? So everything is so detailed. And I realized that in the last, month and a half, because we're in February, when I actually take the time to take an hour, on Sundays to look at my week and write it out, it really is a game changer for me. And I'm like, I have to live by this, along with my other calendars. But I really have to look at this and say, where am I and what am I doing? And maybe I might move it to another day or another time for whatever the reason might be. But I try to stick to it as much as I can to not beat up myself emotionally and get down on myself. So yeah, I've been figuring out my accommodations for like the last 36 years.
I love that. I'm still doing the same thing. And I have a question I want to ask you in the sense, because it was starting to hit me the other day. What is a skill that you have? And I'll give you time to think about it if you need it. But what is this random skill that you have because of your ADHD? And I'll give you an example. I'll give you my random skill that I have. And so you can see where I'm going with this. So I have the ability to be able to predict any movie, book, anything. I just need a couple of like small details, and then I can pretty much tell you the entire story. And the reason why I say that is an ADHD skill set is because in school I hated reading. I love reading now as an adult, as long as it's something that I'm interested in.
Exactly.
I have to be interested in it. But in school, I didn't want to read anything. And it was probably because I was being told what book I had to read, and that was like a solid no-go. And so I would always not do so hot on the quizzes and tests because I didn't read the book. I didn't want to read the book. I didn't read it. But towards, I would say like my junior or senior year of high school, I had gotten to the point where if I opened up the book at least and kind of did a quick flip through and could pick out a couple solid things, I could infer enough of what was going to happen in the book that I could at least write a paper or take a quiz and pass it. And that to me is my ADHD skill set that came about because of my laziness towards not wanting to read a book. And that's still kind of a skill set I have now. Like we'll watch my husband and I will watch a movie or something, and I'll be like, oh, this is how it's going to play out. And he'll be like, it'll be so weird if it doesn't. And then sure enough, that's how it plays out. But I think it's like this traumatized skill set, whatever I had to come up with, mainly because I just didn't want to read books in high school. And I'm curious if you have this random skill that you're like, where am I ever going to use this in life? But I have it because it was almost like an accommodation that you had to create for yourself because of your ADHD, because you either didn't like something or didn't want to do something, but something still had to get done. And I probably gave you out there in left field, but
no. Actually, it's so funny because, and I think this is another ADHD thing. Like as you were talking, I was listening and processing, but then I was also thinking, and I was like, okay, how can this work? No, I think I do have something, and I think it probably is based on my skills, like my gift, but also the trauma, So I think for me, kind of, I don't know how to word it, but thinking quickly on my feet, like being able to, so in some cases doing some, as an adult now doing trainings and stuff for teachers, like I really don't like scripts. I really don't like, kind of similar to what you're saying. If someone's like, read this book, Kristen, read The Grapes of Wrath, you're like, please, maybe I can summarize what's going to happen. But I think for me, I don't like that. And so sometimes it's that like, beating myself up, like, oh gosh,
Mhm.
what is this about? Like, I have to give up this training to all these teachers, and what if I forget, and what if this, and what if that? And I actually did a training last night for a school district. I was a facilitator, and I really did. I kind of glanced at the notes, but I mean, like, I'm so good with just talking to people, connecting with them, really
Mhm.
understand. And I also just know the landscape of teaching. So I feel like it's just like, I'm not going to stress myself out. I'm just going to roll with it and let it roll. And I think that there are many times where I'm in situations like that where when I was younger, I would go
Mhm.
into like a full blown like panic attack about it, get anxiety about it, but I was still able to perform sometimes. But
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
more in that people interaction. Like, give me a test, forget it. I would freeze, like
Mhm.
total test anxiety. But
Oh,
when it
yeah.
came to talking to people, I could kind of work my way around. And I don't mean like telling lies or anything. I mean like just having a conversation, still being able to be present, still being able to think on my feet. Like, you just asked me this question and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, where is this going to go? But then I'm thinking like, okay, I had this training last night. I mean,
Mhm.
I knew the overall general concept of the science of reading and supporting these teachers, but I was like, we're just going to roll with these breakout rooms and see where it goes. And it was
Right.
great. It was great. And I think another thing too is I tend to things make more sense to me with movie quotes,
Mm.
song lyrics, and like metaphors. And it's funny because like as you were talking, I was thinking about one of my best friends from college. We kind of talk to each other through song quotes and movie quotes. And I can just text him anything. And like
Mhm.
literally today, I sent him like a Pearl Jam quote, and then he just finished it. There is no like, what are you doing? Like, I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure he probably has ADHD, but it's just crazy. And I'm like, I love having conversations with people who just get that.
I feel like the more I talk to you, the more I'm like, I think we might be sharing a brain.
I feel that way too sometimes.
Because those of you who are listening, Dr. Lauren and I have had several conversations with each other prior to this before I've been on her podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
We've just met in general networking. And so the more I am talking to Dr. Lauren, I am realizing we are very much sharing a brain or somewhere our information is coming from
It's
the same place.
connected. It's crazy. We probably would have been the worst in a class in high
Oh,
school because we
we
would have
wouldn't
just
have been allowed to sit next to each
no,
other.
or I would still be throwing notes to you or like
Mhm.
making faces or something.
Mhm, mhm. We would have gotten in a lot of trouble for talking, and then once we were trying to be quiet, we would have been right. I don't think I would have known what was going on in that class at all
Nope.
because I would have been more involved in wanting to just, like, chat with you the
Yep.
entire time.
Socializing, social
Mhm,
butterflies.
mhm. That's too funny. That is too funny. Well, okay, some other things that I would like to know a little
Yeah.
bit more about you, and I wanna give you an opportunity to dive into your work with dyslexia and kind of
Sure.
how that I mean, you shared your why and everything, but, like, how that came about, your passion for it, things that you wish people knew, about dyslexia. It was funny, I was on a podcast the other day with a gentleman who was dyslexic, and I was talking about the dyslexic brain, and I was talking about creativity and seeing things in
Yeah.
3D, and he's like, "I never even" he's like, "That's exactly how I see things, but nobody had ever told me before, like, that's what my" put words to it, that that was my brain. And so I'm curious to what you think is stuff that you wish people were more aware of when it came to individuals with dyslexia, because I think oftentimes people think, "Oh, you just can't read," or "You just" and
Yeah.
that's not what it is. So what do you wish people were aware of and knew, and where does your passion come from with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this really connects to probably my why with my ADHD. And I know speaking to a lot of adults with dyslexia that I've interviewed about their essential childhood trauma, school childhood trauma, is just being completely misunderstood,
Mhm,
completely being either, how do I word this? Either told that they were lazy or dumb. Like, I
yeah.
can't really believe teachers would say that, but I know it's happened.
We know it
Mhm.
happens,
It
unfortunately.
happens. Exactly. And if it's not said, I don't know what's worse. If it's not said or if it's like this subliminal message, like, well, we're
Mhm,
just going to exclude you because you can't do this. And I think there's so much to unpack with that it's not just about reading slowly or not comprehending. It's literally how the brain is wired. And I think that the big thing that I always talk about whenever I do interviews with people about just basic signs and symptoms is you have to understand it's not going to go away. It's not something where I've had many parents say to me like, oh, okay, after this OG intervention, like when is my kid going to get over this? Or when is it going to go away? And, I think about myself and I'm like, no, I've been hyper talkative, all over the map, literally my entire life. I don't think that's going away. I think that's just how I am. And obviously, as I've gotten older, having a later diagnosis, I'm learning more about that. And it's very similar to dyslexics. And obviously, you and I have talked about this. The earlier the intervention and the screening and the diagnosis, the better. Because you don't walk around with self-esteem issues. You don't walk around thinking you're dumb.
Yep.
And so I think like that's another thing. I mean, we need to really look at society will put people who are illiterate, people who may not be as articulate in a box that they're stupid. And I've worked with teachers, like not necessarily co-teaching, but in a building in public school, not in the specialized private schools, who've made comments like college isn't for them. Well, you know what? First of all, maybe college isn't for everybody, but we need mechanics. We need people who can install HVACs. We need people who are going to do different skill sets because we all have different strengths. Yeah. And I just don't subscribe to that whole, like, you and I are academics because we chose to be, but that's not everybody's path. Right. And I just, I feel very passionate about hearing stories of older people, like in their 50s and 60s, who are now realizing like, I am dyslexic, but because we didn't talk about that, in the 60s, or I didn't get the right intervention, well, I ended up dropping out of high school and just, going to be a construction worker and making minimum wage. And I mean, it's just, I could go on and on. So I don't know if I really had a point. I was kind of all over.
No, but I'm like, yes, get it. The entire time you're talking, I was following and tracking it. So, I mean, I think you did have a valid point that we're putting people in boxes and saying that you can or can't do things based off, what some of your, I don't even like to call them learning challenges, because I feel like oftentimes it's just because people aren't being presented with learning the way that works for them.
Yeah,
because we only have this one size fits all learning. And if it doesn't work for you, then something's wrong with you. When in reality, there's nothing wrong with you. Your brain just needed a different way, a different path, a different exposure, like an arts-based curriculum or project-based learning, or things where you're listening to audio. But, and I think oftentimes, and I think this was the point you were kind of getting on, is that we automatically assume that if you are impacted by something like dyslexia, then you're also cognitively impacted. And that's not true. That is not true. But yet I think we assume this. If you're not familiar with learning needs, you assume it. And then I think we make kids feel that way too, because people who are not aware, and I'm not picking on teachers. I am a teacher. You are a teacher. I'm not picking on teachers. But oftentimes too, I have found with general education teachers that they don't get some of those specialized classes that special ed teachers got. And even sometimes special ed teachers didn't get all the specialized classes that they need. Yeah. And sometimes people just don't know things. You don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
But the problem is making assumptions when you don't know, and not realizing how impactful that can be to the child and their well-being and their development and their views of themselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. 100% agree with that. And I mean, honestly, I will say this. I love educators, as you said, you and I are educators, but they're just teacher prep programs. And I know there's a shift with the talking about the science of reading. And I know IDA is trying to do more accreditation for these teacher prep programs, but that's really the root cause. If people want to go into education, that's like going to medical school to be a surgeon and you're just done after 4 years. No, you need residency, you need specialization, you need even more specialization. And I just feel like, first of all, we don't get the education. And I got to be honest with you, I loved Syracuse University School of Education program. They were huge with inclusion. I learned nothing about dyslexia. everything I learned about dyslexia was on the job training. On the
Mhm.
job training,
Mhm.
going through my Orton Gillingham associate coursework, practicum, being in a space where there were a whole bunch of teachers who were doing the same thing I was doing, understood, they paved the way, I could go ask questions. It was not until I went to public school that I was like, what is wrong with these people? I was like in this bubble of like, why don't people understand this kid's dyslexic? Like, why aren't they understanding that this is what they need? Why are they trying to throw them in this box and give them Shakespeare or give them, whatever text they're supposed to read? It was mind boggling to me.
Oh, I 100% agree. We see that across the board. We see that with students who are actually cognitively impacted too,
Yeah.
who are students who do need more of a life skill type of curriculum so that
Yes.
when they leave
Yes.
school, they can, pay
Function.
bills and get a job and function
Exactly.
and know how to take the bus. But yet we still have to make sure that we have crammed Shakespeare down their throat and all that. And I'm like,
Algebra.
right. Like, is this really serving them? That's kind of a side point.
Yeah, that's another conversation.
That's a whole nother podcast and
Yeah.
a whole nother topic. But yeah, I think what I have noticed too is, and I think you'll be able to appreciate this. You have an advanced degree, so you have focused on something very specific, and that is what I did. I focused on something very specific, and I notice now when I go into a lot of meetings, IEP meetings specifically with schools, that there's kind of this like 30-year gap. Like we have all this research that exists, right? All this research and updates and everything that we've done these are best practices for kids. This is what the brain does. This is how the brain looks, but it hasn't been incorporated into any of those teacher prep programs. So it's like everybody who doesn't have a advanced focus of study. And I'm not saying you need to have it, but if you don't have it, then you're kind of operating at this like 30-year deficit of this is how we used to look at kids with these needs. And there's all this data and information that has come out, but it's like nobody knows it or understands it. And then when people like yourself, when I come into a meeting and I say, well, hold on a second, and I present it, it's like I have three heads sometimes because people are like, what? Like where? And it's on one hand, I've got parents being like, oh, you get it. Finally, you get it. But like school system people are like, no. And it's just because they haven't gotten that like updated information.
Or I'm going to push back on that. Or they
Mhm.
know it and they literally don't care. I had one teacher tell me, I was a learning specialist and I was doing cartwheels, doing everything to be like, let's try it like this because the students weren't doing well. And literally this teacher said, oh, I've been doing this since 1982. What?
Yeah, you get a lot. Yeah. Okay. You are 100% right. I have gotten that one too.
Like 1982. I don't even know how long ago what is that? 40 years ago? Like whatever. Yeah. Like what are we doing? I mean, literally, I've said this before, and like I'm getting loud because I'm getting passionate. Would you take your child to a pediatrician and have the pediatrician say, oh, I haven't, updated my research since no, you wouldn't. And why are we doing that with our teachers and, our neurodiverse students? And it's not like they're more neurodiverse students than there were, because that's another thing teachers say, well, they're just more kids getting diagnosed. No, it's because there's more discussion. There's a podcast. There's a whole
awareness.
Yes, awareness and resources where it's like, no, this isn't new. It's just new to you. And you don't want to, it's like teaching an old dog new tricks. You just don't want to learn the new tricks because it requires you to update your lesson plans from 1998.
100%. No, 100%. Plus, even if we took some of the factors, like even just take neurodiversity, all that out of the equation, kids 40 years ago to kids today are just different because of what they've been exposed to, what they have access to, everything. And so you're going to have to evolve as a teacher, regardless if there's even learning, like even removing the learning needs out of the equation, you would have to evolve just because kids are different. Now I'm getting passionate and loud, right? But just because kids are different, but you're right. So many veterans get stuck in this is how I've always done it. And I don't need to change because it's always worked. But no, it doesn't.
It doesn't. I mean, you and I can attest to that. Like,
Yes. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to bring it back.
Yeah, I'm getting hot.
I know, right? microphones all over the place. I'm going to bring it back down. I want to turn it back over to you and your business. I want to give you an opportunity to share with everyone specifically what you can come in and do, where people can find you, how they
Yeah.
can connect with you if they want to learn more. So I'm going to turn it over to you and have you share with the audience specifically about what you do and how to get in touch with you.
I love that. Thank you. So, really, in the 12 years working in various schools, working with families, as I said in the beginning of the podcast, like I'm trying to cut through the red tape, but I also know that an intervention's not enough. So, for me, I have that more holistic approach. So, being an OG trained certified practitioner and also an educational therapist, I really look at the whole family. And the best way, because I like my analogies, is if you shake up a bottle of soda and it spills everywhere in your kitchen, you're going to clean up the mess that you can see, right? So I look at that mess as that's the immediate concern. My child can't read. We need to clean up this mess. We need to find an OG interventionist. Oh, okay. We're going to find this person. It's great. Well, the problem is that what about the Coke stains in the other places that maybe got under the refrigerator or in the pantry or other places where you're finding them days, weeks, months later when you're not really getting to the root of the problem. And, I'm not saying that literacy and having your child not get that right intervention isn't going to help, but how do we serve the whole family? And that's with mindset. That's with setting goals. We have to look at each family's goals are different individually and collectively. So my packages really are about 3 or 6 months of what are we going to work towards, not just to tutor your child, because you're going to be involved too. And how are we going to work together as a team where there are coaching sessions, we're looking at the data, being people like you and I, where we have these advanced degrees in special educators, we want to look at the data. We want to look at, is this working? And if it's not working, yes, I'm the one that's driving how this is going to move, but we're doing this as a team. So I really have that holistic approach with the intervention, but I'm also coaching the families to know how to go to these IEP meetings, to really know how to educate their child's teacher, to really, some parents realize, oh my gosh, I'm the one who's dyslexic. And this is triggering for me going into my child's school because they're saying all these negative things and I freeze up. And, it's, again, that educational therapy component. So that's one component of what I do. I've also coached teachers who just want to kind of understand, like, what is the science of reading? How can I help my dyslexic learners? How can I really have more accommodating lesson plans and help with my differentiation? So that's something that's more of a needs-based. That's more of, what do you need? Let's hop on a consult call. Let's look at how long you want this to be. And I also do some contract work with a few folks where I do some trainings. And that's where I do my dyslexia training, dyslexic screening training. I've done some multi-tiered systems of support training as well for school districts, administrators, and teachers. So that's a little bit about what I do, and you can find me at thinkdyslexia.me, www.thinkdyslexia.me. Everything is there. I've been updating my website, but you can find my podcast, which is a great free resource where I'm just like in love with this whole idea of me finding folks like yourself to come on, share their experiences and how they can contribute in the dyslexia world to help parents. I have free courses to just kind of get your knowledge about the DQs. And just a whole bunch of other great resources. Oh, I just published a book with some other co-authors who are speech language pathologists. So the Speech Language Pathologist's Guide to Dyslexia. So you can get that at Barnes & Noble. It's $24.99. And I'm also in the process of doing my own self-publishing to kind of just like get the message out there about what is this holistic approach? Why is this something that moms, or more so parents, but I speak to moms because I'm a mom. Why do we need this? How do we pour into ourselves as busy moms and all of that? So that's in the works, still working on a few books, but I drop affirmation episodes every Monday because I believe in pouring into my mental health and I want other moms to feel empowered to do that too. So I'm going to be working on an affirmations book so you can have that physical copy to read and reread and really, get that validation. So yeah, you can find me on my website. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm sure you can just Google my name and stuff will pop up.
I love it. And I'm sitting here getting goosebumps about everything you're doing. That's so exciting. I didn't realize some of those projects, and that's
Thank
amazing.
you. Thank
I,
you.
I love it. Well, before we finish up, I have a question to ask you. It's a question I like to ask all of my guests. And that
Yeah.
question is, if you could give advice to youth, young adults who are struggling academically or maybe even social emotionally, what advice would you give?
That's a really good question. I think to really kind of go a little bit inward, not in a bad way. I mean, like really think about like, what am I good at? Like, what are some things that I'm really good at, and how can I really put that energy out there? I think there's a lot of misconception with social media. There's a lot of comparing ourselves to others. I mean, we adults do it all the time too. But I think that if you can really go back to your why, like what drives you, what makes you, what brings you happiness, what brings you joy, and why does it do that, that can really get to the core values of who you are, and really like taking out all of that noise of I need to do this, I need to be here, I need to have a kid at this age, I need to be married, like all the things. And I'm actually talking about myself because those are things that I was doing. And I think once I got quiet, meditated, journaled, reflected, learned how to love myself, it didn't really matter my neurodiverse brain and my talking so much and all of that. It was more of like, what is my why? And I was really able to think about what are my core values so I can really connect with others. So I know that's like really high level. And I know that that probably requires a lot of like, how do I find my why? And I think that that's really a journey. It really is.
No, I agree with that. And I think that's great. I think finding your why, you're spot on. It is part of the journey. And once you can, diving deep into that is
Yeah.
something that's so important to do for everybody. And even if it doesn't happen until you're in your mid 30s when that why finally hits you, it's still an important thing to go after. But Dr. Lauren, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today. I really do appreciate you just in general. You're just a light and a ray of sunshine, and I just enjoy you. And I really appreciate you coming on and just sharing your journey with all of my listeners as well.
Yes. Thank you for having me, Dr. Kristen. And I'm just so happy to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you to all of my listeners. I appreciate every single one of you. And I will see you next week on the Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast. Bye, y'all. The Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast is an Eccleston Education Consulting LLC